but I just want to go ahead and kick things off. My name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the founder and executive director of writing workshops here in Dallas. And it is just such a pleasure to see all of you here on this Wednesday in December. We've been doing the Big Texas Read for 2.5 years, pretty much as soon as the pandemic started. David Samuel Levinson reached out to me and Alexandra Vandekamp and said, I have this crazy idea for a virtual book club. And I didn't know if it would last 1 month, 2 months, or now here we are 2.5 months later. And it's just been a lot of fun to talk to authors who have some Texas roots. It's been a lot of fun to get to know Alexandra and Gemini Inc. And it's been fun to get to know David a lot more. So thank you all for being here. I always like to thank Lone Star Literary. They're a great online meeting space for bookish events in Texas. They always help us spread the word on Twitter, social media. We love to thank Humanities Texas, who has given us a grant to run this program, to pay our featured guests, which is fantastic. So it's made possible by Humanities Texas. Bookstores, local bookstores. We love our local bookstores here in Dallas specifically. We love Who's Books and Terabang Books, who've helped spread the word. And down in San Antonio, the Twig Bookshop, which has been fantastic. The University of Texas San Antonio Library System also does a great job of helping us get the word out about the Big Texas Read. So 2.5 years on, it takes a lot of people to make this work, but no one more important than our featured guests and then also you in the audience. So thank you so much for being here. Please, during the discussion, put your questions in the chat. We will be sure to get to those at the end after Suzanne and Tomas talk for the next 45 minutes. And it's just a real pleasure. So thank you for being here. I'm going to hand it over to Alexandra Vandekamp, Executive Director down at Gemini Inc.
Hey everyone, it's so nice to see you mid-December. This is the last Big Texas Read of 2022. Time always seems to have an inconsistent way about it, but I can't believe it's December. But I think this is a wonderful way to end our 2022 lineup. We have the wonderful author Tomas Q Mori, poet and now also memoirist as our featured author, and then the amazing Suzanne Ohlmann as our featured moderator. Gemini Inc., in case you don't know, we are San Antonio's Writing Arts Center, and our mission is to teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. And part of that mission is creating literary community in new and interesting ways. And we love the Big Texas Read because we bring readers together with writers. It's easy, it's zoomed into your home, and we always just have amazing, stimulating conversations around writing and all the strange journeys authors go on to arrive at the places they arrive at. So we're really excited about tonight's offering. So I'm going to introduce Suzanne as our moderator, and then Tomas, and then I will leave the moderating to Suzanne, and she'll take over the quote unquote virtual stage for about the next 45 minutes. So a little bit on Suzanne. Suzanne Ohlmann is a writer, nurse, and musician, and she is fellow pressmates with Tomas. They've both had their recent memoirs published by the University of Nebraska Press. Woo woo, pressmates, right? Her first book has an amazing title, Shadow Migration, Mapping a Life. It came out recently in March 2022. Her essays have been published by the Cleveland Review of Books, Texas Monthly, Intima, the Journal of Narrative Medicine, and Long Reads. She lives in San Antonio with her husband, son, and a throng of dogs and cats. And I just want to take a moment to give a shout out to her own memoir. It recounts the tenacious search into the shadows of her life. I won't tell you more because I want you to read it, but it has pretty impressive praise. And it makes me, it's like kind of seems like a must read, everyone. Author Beverly Donofrio states, Ohlmann reveals herself to be a brave soul who reaches for the light while never turning from the dark. Her story sparkles with such insight and honesty, gutsy humor, and restrained Midwestern bravado. I felt bereft when I had to turn the last page and leave her. That's quite a comment, everyone. Okay, so we all love page turning stories here at the Big Texas Read. So I think we're really delighted to have Suzanne as our moderator. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about our featured author, Tomas Q Mori. I had a wonderful experience meeting him in person at the recent San Antonio Book Festival, and he's a brilliant poet and also a brilliant memoirist. And I just had the best time with him and Robert Reeves. And so we're kind of extra delighted to have him be our feature in December. He's on the faculty at Rice University and Vermont College of Fine Arts. He's the author of the poetry collections Machete, Patient Zero, and A Larger Country, and now author of this stunning and heartbreaking memoir, Let Me Count the Ways. This is the book we'll be talking about tonight. It's just out from University of Nebraska Press. He's also a co-editor with Marie L'Esperance of the anthology Coming Close, 40 Essays on Philip Levine. His work has appeared in no other than the New York Times, The Nation, Slate, Poetry, Threepenny Review, and Narrative. He's also a National Endowment of the Arts Fellow. And just a moment about his memoir, the praise is very effusive. Kirkus Reviews calls it evocative, lyrical, and brave. And the amazing Maxine Hung Kingston, the author, of course, The Warrior Woman, says, in this fearsome, beautiful memoir, Toma Q Mori takes us on a journey exploring the limits of suffering and love. Those are the words he uses to praise a fellow poet, but the story of his upbringing is just such a wild trip. The young Tomas constantly searches for the right words to say to his beloveds, his abusers. And in Let Me Count the Ways, every episode is a prose poem. And this memoir touches on obsessive compulsive disorders and the mechanisms Tomas used to survive a childhood that was not of the easiest kind at all. So I'm going to turn this over to Suzanne, because of course we want to hear from her and from Tomas. So Suzanne, take it away.
Well, I'm going to start by saying hello, and then I'm going to get out of the way and hope that Tomas is ready to share a selection of his reading before we dive into conversation.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Big Texas Read for, sharing the book, choosing the book, Suzanne, for on very short notice, very enthusiastically jumping in to help talk with me, tonight. And thanks everyone who's, spending a little bit of this, December wintry night with us. The book is composed of short chapters and long chapters. So I'm going to read probably maybe one or two of the short vignettes. This first one is titled On Names. When I was growing up, you could probably go in many neighborhoods where people were up to no good in the Coastal Bend area and mention El Indio. And if someone didn't know him, they knew someone who did. As far as nicknames go, Indio and Chief are pretty good. What guy wouldn't want to be called Chief? In Mathis, Texas, many people had nicknames. The one catch was that you couldn't pick your own. If you tried, you'd be ignored and get called by whatever nickname your body suggested. Or worse, some interesting lie about you that was making the rounds. One guy everyone called Tick. He was short, overweight, and had the kind of plump, happy face you get after gorging on the neighbor's dog. Another guy was nicknamed Rana because he had a voice so raspy it reminded you of a frog croaking. Had Tom Waits been from Mathis, Rana would have had competition for his name. A group of people could also be given a nickname. Someone walking down the road one day looked in a yard where kids were crawling in a tree like monkeys. That was all it took for those brothers and sisters to be called Los Changos. A pair of brothers from another family were Los Calcetines, after someone saw them playing outside as children with nothing on their feet but long socks. The nickname didn't always end with the person it was given to. When a man named La Víbora had children, it seemed like the most natural thing to call all of his kids snakes too. In conversation, that family was then known as Las Víboras. If you'd been nicknamed La Paca because your long torso with no curves reminded people of a rectangular hay bale, then when you had children who inherited the shape of your body, of course, everyone was going to call your kids Las Paquitas. Physical disabilities were not out of bounds. If I had had a bum leg I dragged behind me, I might have been nicknamed Escoba because of the sweeping motion my leg made. A boy who was born mute was called Mudo. A man who was my father's age was El Columpio, after his legs that had been twisted by polio made him swing his arms and legs when he walked. While calling someone a swing sounds cruel, he smiled when I saw someone yell, Columpio. And why wouldn't he smile when having a nickname meant you belonged? Besides, who wouldn't want people to say your name and think of kids laughing as they swung from the earth to the sky like pendulums of joy? On being. Smack, dragon, tar, brown tape, junk, white nurse, Henry, dead on arrival, Harry, Chinese red, salt, dirt, diesel, joy flakes, nice and easy, rush hour, Charlie, blue bag, H, good horse, antifreeze, noise, foil, hero, and the list goes on. I can't remember what name my father and his friends used. Chiva, maybe. They say upward of 700,000 people abuse heroin in the United States every year. How can they even know that? I don't recall anyone asking my father to participate in a drug census back when he was using. It has to be over 1 million at least. Any number higher than 100 can be hard to wrap your mind around. I might as well tell you 700,000 people wrestle alligators every year. It wouldn't mean much more or less if I did. No matter how hard we try, there are some things the brain can't take in all at once. Even the mathematical genius who carries 100,000 digits of pi in his mind can't take in the totality of all those human veins used as tunnels. And if you factor in not just the 700,000 faces of the users, but also all the faces of their families and friends, then you'd fail. And even if you could sit there like Haraguchi, the current pi record holder, and call up 700,000 tormented faces, why would you? If a number that's too big to wrap your mind around isn't bad enough, the word is that heroin is now so pure, you don't even need to cook it anymore. Now, if you want to bypass the whole business of needles, you just snort it and board a bullet train to oblivion. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace. This sounds like oblivion to me. What else do you call the place where being and ideal grace come to an end? I've heard some people say heroin is the purest form of love. Self-love, maybe. Users claim that it has the power to make every pain in their life disappear briefly. Of course, every person and joy in their life disappears too. While Elizabeth Barrett Browning was writing these words from How Do I Love Thee to her future husband, this poem always makes me think of my father when he was happy, when he was one of 700,000 souls without a name, and how maybe, just maybe, he might not have felt alone then. Thank you. And before we jump to the conversation, I just wanted to give a shout out to our editor, Courtney Oxner, who's listening, because we wouldn't be here with books to share and to talk about if it wasn't for Courtney. So Courtney, thank you for your faith in our work.
It's a tireless faith. It's a sleepless faith. Well, I've got lots of questions. But here's where I just want to start. I want to know, it's a two-pronged question. So with gratitude that you asked me to do this, and to three strangers who created this and said, sure, we'll ask her. Don't know anything about her, but I bet it'll be a good idea. So here we all are. I raise a candle to everyone from Toronto to California to North Dallas and all parts in between. I also brought lightly salted almonds, but I can't share them with you, and I'm sorry. Okay, come on. So to expose these profound parts of your life in narrative, I'm wondering, who was the anonymous audience that you were hoping to reach once it potentially became published versus who was the audience that you wrote to be able to get these very difficult parts of your history on the page?
It's a great question. Well, when I was first composing the first draft, I've never taken a workshop in nonfiction. My formal training was all in poetry. I really didn't know what I was doing.
That's very honest. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was trying to, I was reading voraciously, all the books, the classics, and that were gaps in my reading, and then also reading like books on craft, like Mary Carr's The Art of Memoir was huge. The audience that I had initially in mind was my surrogate father, Jackie.
Okay.
And like the impetus for writing the book was I was in my 30s, and I'd reached a point where a lot of the stories that are in the book were stories that I would share with really close friends. And I happened to share one of the stories with a friend, and I forgot that I had already shared this same story. And the friend said, the last time you told me that story, this particular detail was different.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And I realized I had sort of reached that point where these stories from my childhood were in my memory, they were reshaping and shifting.
Yes.
And none of the three men that I write about in the book, my grandfather, father, and my surrogate father, are alive anymore. And I suddenly felt a sort of panic. I felt like I'd been able to hold on to them through these stories. And if they were going to change with me, as memories do, then they were going to be different, and it was going to be like losing them again. And I'm a huge fan of Annie Dillard's, and she says somewhere, I think it's in The Writing Life, but she says somewhere that a word of caution for people who write nonfiction, personal essay and memoir. And what she says is that sometimes when you put a memory from your life into language and set it on the page, sometimes it fossilizes, and then that memory stops growing with you. And if that fossilization is not something you want, then it might be better not to write it down. Whereas for me, when I read that, I was like, oh great, I can fossilize these these men, these three men, and in that way preserve them.
Like your stone tablets, like
right.
You're coming down.
Yeah.
This is
right. Yeah, and with Annie Dillard as God, and so initially I was like recreating the dialogue, recreating the conversations with Jackie was my most fun part of writing the book. The other two parts were sadder. They were sadder and harder to write emotionally. But so he was sort of the audience that I had in mind. And then fast forward, the book is out, and I'm a new father. I'm a father for the first time, and now I realize that my son, who doesn't have grandfathers, now one day in the future, if he chooses to read this book, he has access to these other generations of men. From my family that he wasn't able to experience, firsthand.
Well, I wrote this to myself. Did you know you started this before knowing you would even become a father? Is that right? I heard in the podcast, the Vulgar Sciences podcast, that you have your first draft was 2014. So that's quite a while ago.
Yeah.
And how long was your first draft compared to the final? You can say whether thousands of words or pages, however you want to tell us. Like, did you have to chop a lot out, or did you just shapeshift a lot?
I'm more of a shapeshifter. And that way in my poetry as well. I always tell my students that, there tend to be two kinds of writers: the kind who they have to create the block of marble that they then chisel a form out of. Like the author, the novelist, Matt Bell. Like sometimes his first drafts of his novels are like 300,000 words, 400,000 words. And then what actually gets published is a 175,000 word, novel.
Monumental editing.
Right. Whereas for me, I'm the opposite. I'm starting with dust that I'm creating into the statue.
You make a
So
lot of biblical references. Yes.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Um,
Methuselah is like on page 3 of your book. I mean,
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it was over 200 pages. I know that much. I can't remember what actually, I do remember what the word count is because this is going to sound really silly, but it helped me because I'd never written anything that long
sure.
creatively. But I found out what the word count was for The Great Gatsby. And I aimed for having the first draft to be the same number of words as The Great Gatsby, because I thought if you can write a book that's that perfect, with that minimum number of words, then that's, I don't know, my mind, it was some sort of like bar, to just get to that, then I have a chance of writing something that actually has a beginning, middle, end. Of course, it didn't have a beginning, middle, end when I finished the first draft, but I was left with something I could work with.
Well, I love to hear these ways. I mean, I think that's one of the ways you invite us in immediately in your book to obsessive compulsive disorder. Is you basically invite us into a car to count with you as you're driving and as you're at a stoplight.
Yeah.
And to me, I don't know if it came out of you that way. At what point you realized this was a way to introduce a stranger to the inner workings of your obsessions, compulsions, neurodivergency, in a way that did not feel like you were either virtue signaling that you were neurodivergent, nor shaming yourself for being neurodivergent. You were just saying, this is what it's like when I'm driving.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, do you find yourself, since this book is out in the world, being more changing in your conversational style about yourself and the way you present, the way your mind works?
In some ways, yeah. In some like very sort of concrete ways, like for example, when I was doing my uploading my file and creating my file for Rice University after I'd gotten the job and uploading everything into human resources, one of the questions was, do you have a disability? And I looked at the list, and in the list was obsessive compulsive disorder. And I thought, is that a disability?
That's new.
So part of my journey in writing the book and exploring and sharing this is just kind of coming around to, like these things that I just assumed everyone else did. I just assumed everyone else thought through the world in the same way actually isn't typical.
Right.
And just coming to that awareness, and then and coming to it from a place of not of shame. I mean, I remember the first time I ever heard of obsessive compulsive disorder was it was decades ago, but it was this show on MTV, and there's this poor man who it was a documentary, and the episode was on obsessive compulsive disorder, and this poor man who had to wash his hands I think 50 times before he could leave, and then he actually didn't end up being able to leave his apartment. And I feel like after that, the narrative, whenever I would hear people mention obsessive compulsive disorder, the narrative always seemed like people's understanding of it had to do with cleanliness and obsession with hygiene.
Yes.
When in fact, I mean, it presents differently for all of us because it's an anxiety disorder, and it presents differently. And so then, thinking of, as I was writing this book, someone might see me and be like, well, I didn't see him stuck in the bathroom at work, for 2 hours washing his hands. So what makes him think he has obsessive compulsive disorder?
Right.
So I thought,
anything. Right.
Right. So I thought if I can write this, short chapter, this vignette, just sort of window right into what it's like to move through physical space for me, with the way OCD presents for me. then it almost felt like this is my certification, you know. But at the same time, it also tied into my childhood and, coping mechanisms, for surviving that part of my life. And so it was all of a part, all of a piece.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, and it makes me think of these coping mechanisms rather than something to be ashamed of, but something to be explored. And what strikes me as I read your book and as I've read your poems is that it even strikes me more with your poetry, only because there's more of it to read, but that they're little containers.
Yeah.
And obsessive thinking or compulsive thinking or any kind of neurotic or neurodivergent thinking is a container for the human experience. And so will you tell us as a writer why you chose the container of narrative memoir rather than a collection of essays or a couple of, giving each character, a book of lyric poems or thing? Like, what made you choose this for this part of you and these parts of you, these fossilized, the stone tablets?
I think a big part of it was, it wasn't until my most recent book of poems where I started writing. I won't call them, it's not confessional poetry. We're so far away from the confessionals. It's like, we probably shouldn't use that anymore. But the poetry that I'm writing now is closer to who I am, how I speak, how I think.
Sure.
Than the poems from my first two books. Particularly my first book, it's almost all dramatic monologues, persona poems, very much writing through masks. And that came out of my feeling like, who would ever want to read anything about my life? My life is the most uninteresting thing to me. So why would it be interesting to anyone else? It's that Robert Frost thing. No surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. But then I was able to get at things that I was interested in through these persona poems. So it's still me. I'm just a couple masks, behind. But then becoming a father, it felt like the stakes were different in terms of my poetry. Because I feel like at some point or another, when I'm not here anymore, I would like my son to be able to go to one of my books and find me and find himself, find himself there.
You're not allowed to make me emotional.
Find himself at 2, at 2 years old, find himself at 5. But yeah, so then the memoir, which came before I ever knew I was going to be a father. I don't know. There's just something about the form that felt like I could be messy. Like it could be a messy form for a messy life, and yeah. So that's why I thought, it was an experiment. I thought, I'll try it. It may fail. This may be an experiment that fails, and then I have to try another genre. But I thought, that's sort of the genre, right? And as a newbie, to nonfiction, I thought, well, I'm not going to set out to try to write the most experimental memoir ever. I'm just going to go in and try to write something kind of straightforward. And even then, when I shared it with my friends who are prose writers, oftentimes the question I got was, well, what's the narrative arc? What's the arc in here?
Tomas, where is it?
I was like, what?
People like, I'm the narrative arc.
Right. So anywho, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think it does. I think knowing how much attention you pay to detail, I can imagine that trying to fit these stories into maybe even loose poetic form might have just felt like it was like the belt didn't fit right, or kind of a corset onto something that wasn't going to fit in that way. And so you needed to kind of liberate yourself from that thinking and put yourself in a different genre, with or without tangible narrative arc.
Right.
I'm not going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
I do want to know, though, about some of the ordering of things.
Mhm.
And I want to talk about this, I'm going to call it just out of the ordinary, third to the last chapter. That is all definitions. Here, I wrote it down. There's one German word in there, but it's all these different words to describe mood / obsessive compulsive disorder.
Mhm.
You have excerpts from the DSM-4. You have things from the 6th century, the 14th century. Tell me about that, and then how that you felt like would go to the penultimate chapter, which is this, probably to me, the most braided together of the heart of what you were trying to do as you were watching your father and your surrogate father
Mhm.
come to their end as living parts of your
Right.
life. And then the final chapter, which is Coyote, which
Mhm.
is about Coyote, but it's called Genesis.
Mhm.
So talk, would you mind kind of giving us a little of the nuts and bolts, like the
Yeah,
user's
of course.
manual to all that?
Yeah. In terms of ordering, yeah, that was a very sort of like circuitous route. The first draft was just a blob. It was just a blob. And that same summer that I did completed that first draft, I was reading John Barrowman's Dream Songs. And I always try to reread it every year or every 2 years, because I didn't like it. I couldn't connect with it. But I knew that it was genius. I knew that it was genius work. And I was reading the first Dream Song, and in there's a moment near the very end where the narrator talks about, remembers this moment when in his childhood he was up in a tree and how happy he felt. And then that reminded me of the treehouse passage in the first draft of the memoir. So I thought, that's interesting. So then I read the second Dream Song, and then that one reminded me of another passage, all very associative,
Yeah.
Then it happened a third time, and then I thought, okay, so maybe this is the universe telling me that I can use the Dream Songs as a random vignette generator.
There's another beautiful container.
So yeah, right. So that's what I did, and I ended up chopping up that first draft into, I think it was 52 vignettes. I didn't get all the way to 77. So then I felt like I had a deck of playing cards to play around with, and yeah, and I just kind of like lived with it in that shape for a while,
Okay.
and just moved stuff around. Then eventually I ended up with the long chapter, short chapter, long chapter, short chapter, which I borrowed from Maxine Hong Kingston, having these, long chapters, which are very sort of straightforward nonfiction, followed by, these short chapters that take a different tack, into the material, that through juxtaposition say something without having to come out and say the thing. Her second memoir, Chinamen, was hugely influential to me. She has a chapter in there, I think it's called, I wish I could remember exactly what the title is, but I think it's called On the Law, or maybe On the Laws, or the Laws, something like that. But that chapter is just a list of laws that were passed in the United States against Asians and Asian Americans.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
And when I got to that chapter in her memoir, it just kind of stopped me in my tracks. And suddenly, after going through chapter after chapter, seeing her family and the way she reflected upon them, then to suddenly have this chapter where, from a different perspective, because there's no commentary, no editorializing in there.
Yeah. Right. Just like
Right.
yours. Yeah.
Right. And it's just like, here's the outside view of
Mhm.
us, so I was trying
Yeah.
to do the same gesture. It's like,
Okay.
here's like 500-600 year history, of terms that have been applied to obsessive compulsive behavior.
Mhm.
Just here's a list, you know.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I was trying to do the same thing. I was trying to go for the same gesture before. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I found myself picturing you throwing pasta noodles and seeing which one stuck,
Yeah.
like, how about this? The 1867 Schwangvorgestellungen. Nah, that doesn't feel like me. Let me try the 1877 one. Well,
Yeah.
that actually resonates a little, But
Yeah.
also there was something, the way that you ordered those, and again, we all look for ourselves, right? So I'm like,
Sure.
how do you order these? Was I supposed to read them in a different way? What if I read them
Mhm.
aloud? Like I'm overthinking it instead of just taking it in. But I wanted to talk about how the word melancholy is never included in the pop culture ideology
Mhm.
of overwashing your hands.
Right.
You don't,
Yeah.
and that putting that in there, Tomas, was such a gift to us to feel with you
Yeah.
what's happening while you're counting,
Right.
and how the counting might actually be like a generative activity
Mhm.
to keep moving in the midst of
Right.
sorrow.
Right. Right.
So,
It's yeah. Seeing that list and coming across those items and that research, yeah, I was just floored. I was like, oh, we've been wrestling as humans with how to identify
mhm.
this experience for those we know, those we love, those in our communities for a long time.
Mm,
And we're still struggling with it. I think from DSM-4 to DSM-5, like there's even a change there. Like now there's anxiety is an umbrella disorder, is the umbrella term, and obsessive compulsive disorder goes under anxiety now.
mhm.
Um, yeah, and it's just, yeah, I don't know. I just felt like it felt like that's the chapter I would have wanted to read if that book had been written by somebody else. Like, like that one was for me. It was for me, but
Yeah,
also for us. Um,
yeah.
yeah, to sort of, okay, this is the thing that will partly replace that, that episode on MTV, from decades ago. Like, here's me trying to replace that a very, I think, shallow, and shameful representation of obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, when I think back to it, I feel so bad for that guy. Before, I was just like, I was curious, and I felt, I felt pity for him. But now I'm just like, they could have, the producers, the director, they could have handled that differently. They could have presented it differently, as opposed to just a spectacle. They made a spectacle out of it.
Well, this makes me want to ask you about, I hope I'm not harshing on this. I said I wouldn't ask you about narrative arc, but I
No, it's
actually
okay.
got me thinking about time and our portrayal of our memories in creative nonfiction, and
Mhm.
how beginning, middle, end is probably what is sort of thought of as narrative arc.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, does your brain as a writer work with a beginning, middle, and end? Or does your brain work in these representations and memories and research and looking out to dream songs, um, to Chinamen, to all these things, so that you're vibrating with the chorus? Do you feel like, I don't think you're making a statement like narrative arc is dead.
Right. Right. Oh no, you froze. Oh, Suzanne, you froze. Can you hear
I
me?
froze, you froze. Are you there? I'm here.
Yes, yes. The
I'm
last thing I heard you say was, I don't think you're making a statement that narrative arc is dead.
Great. That's the perfect time to have my internet freeze. Uh, no, I'm just curious, if that was where does that sit with you now after
Right.
some of your beta readers were saying that? And
Right.
is that a neurotypical ideology or anything like that?
I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I love what you said about a chorus. You know, that you said that word chorus, like my ears, pricked up. I feel like when I sit down and I try to puzzle um, through a narrative or through a movement, how a speaker or a narrator, is going to move through space and time. Oftentimes, my thinking is it's very elliptical, and it's very associative. And I feel like my task as a writer is to try to find a way to still tell a story without just making the reader feel like I'm going in circles. Um, Not that there isn't any value in going in a circle, but that's usually not the kind of movement that I want. I do want some sort of forward movement. So in a way, sometimes I wouldn't say that I'm dampening the associativeness, but I'm just trying to be subtle with it because I think it still has a lot of value. It has a lot of value. But that's the way the the way the stone turns, in my head.
Okay, here's a question to follow that. Who's your audience? Who's your readers now? And who have been your readers of this book?
I feel like the readers of this book I've been really surprised. I feel like it's attracted folks who, for example, probably don't know my poetry.
Yes.
So so I feel like my readership has expanded from, I hope the folks who do like my poetry and have been sort of following me on that journey, have picked up the book as well. But yeah, I mean, I've received some notes from people who are young readers, about seeing themselves, or their experience in the book. People from some friends or some people from South Texas, who were just delighted to see, a familiar landscape, a familiar, Tejano vibe, it's like, hey, like that's us, I don't live in Mathis, but I live in Cuero, or I live in Freer, or wherever, and that's been really exhilarating.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stands out to me about your writing, and it's I think it has the power to draw in a really wide audience, because to some people, if you look through one lens, you're very much a member of the academy. You're a professor,
Right.
You're making letters, you've got a variety of degrees, you're published, very highly respected in a literary lens. However, you talk frequently about Dirk Nowitzki, Ron James, and the WWF. I'm not talking Friday Night SmackDown. I'm talking 1980s Roddy Piper and the Boston Crab Hole here.
Yeah.
That to me is such a successful modern American voice that could keep anybody, whether it's another professor from another university or the person working the checkout line at HEB, reading. And I'm just wondering, is that something you're thinking about doing, or is that just the voice that you've developed because of who you are in the world?
The latter, just letting, allowing myself to not feel like I had to write for an Academy audience, for an Ivy League audience, and there, as a result, then if I'd gone that route, would have had to have, I feel like, excised some of the associations, some of the things that popped up that it's like, oh, this connects to this and this connects to this. But no, I felt like it all has value. It all has value. There's nothing that's, I hate, the talk of like high culture, low culture,
Right.
it's culture.
Yes.
Yeah, so making room for all of those, all of those things was really important to me. I mean, I didn't, become a writer and become a professor because I wanted to be someone different. I just, like I brought who I was to writing, to teaching, at a university. This is who I am. Better to be accepted, right, for who you are than for who you're pretending to be.
Right.
I know that's not always easy, an easy thing to navigate, but yeah, that's just me.
So that makes me wonder, was there a difference between seeking publishing for this and your experience of that versus seeking publishing for your translations or poetic works?
Hmm.
Did you have to pitch a different character?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, for our publisher, our series, the American Live series. When I read some of those books and read the sort of mission statement, creating this sort of mosaic, of what it means, what life in the US means. I thought, oh, like I want to contribute a piece of glass, for that mosaic, and it would be like absolute like honor, to do that. And I felt like that's where I want this book, to go.
Wow. I just hear a lot of like, was there ever a point where you didn't like, did you ever go in through denial where you were like, I'm going to try to not be from Mathis and I'm going to try to not
Hmm.
have my dad have addiction problems and have abandoned us. I'm going to, or
No, I don't think I would even know how to do that.
I mean, that's what a lot of people spend a lot of
Right,
time doing, Tomas.
right. Um, I mean, as a kid, like in the book, I talk about, how it was kind of an open secret in town that, my father struggled with drugs. But I mean, as a kid, like I had to sort of live with the shame of, I couldn't really have friends come over because, to play at my house because friends who weren't from the neighborhood,
Right. Who didn't like know.
right, who didn't know and have experience of it. I couldn't have friends come over because there's no telling what shape my dad would be in, you know.
Right.
And
And you wouldn't be able to play if you had to take, I mean, because that's one of the things that comes through also is that you were a very much a caregiver when he
yeah,
was in the role.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I just by the time I got to college, to Texas State, it was just, I mean, this is who I am,
Yeah. Well, I think it makes you, I mean, you hear this a lot, but that the combination of introspection with the seeking of containment in an artful
Mhm.
form is a gift to anybody who reads you,
Well, thank
and
you.
will you just take a moment and let the audience know how drafting went for you and how you got yourself to write some of the most difficult stuff to revisit? And maybe it could give some tools to people who are also
Mhm.
trying to write the difficult stuff, even just getting it on the page, the stuff that you don't want to
Mhm.
revisit in detail, but you have to if this is what your mission is.
Right. I mean, one thing that has been enormously helpful to me, as a writer is, you know, making the pact, the deal with myself that the first draft is for me. Um, if no one ever reads this thing, if it never gets published, then that's okay because writing is something that I enjoy so much that by the time I finish drafting something, in a way, I feel like I've already won. Like there's and if something doesn't get published, it doesn't matter. It's going to feed the next thing.
Mhm.
The next thing that I'm working on down the road. So that's been really helpful, and then that makes me not try to write a book for a specific editor or a specific publishing house, but just, it's that Toni Morrison thing. You're trying to write the book that you want to be reading, that you want when you go to a bookstore, you go to a library, the book that you want to find there that's not there, like you write that book. Because there's probably other people. There's probably other people who are looking for that book too.
Yeah. I just wonder, did you ever think about stopping, or once you had the machine oiled and moving forward, you knew you could keep going? There was never like
I almost did stop. I think it was probably midway through the first draft. And what kind of threw me for a loop was what's his name? The classic memoir Stop Time by Frank Conroy. I was reading it and absolutely loving it, but also felt like, oh geez, like if this is where the bar is.
Yes.
Like I can't do that. I can't do that. So what am I doing? If I can't write that good, maybe I should just stop. And someone gave me a copy of the very next day, a copy of Murakami's, who I love his work, his memoir, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. And she said, read this. So I started reading it and I was like, oh, the prose can be very workmanlike and just very like not like Disneyland, high style. It can be very workmanlike and get you from page to page, moment to moment, and still be a fantastic book. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to put the bar there. I'm pretty sure I can clear that bar. I'm going to put the bar there and just keep going, which, I mean, that's like another example of that. I think it was William Stafford, or maybe a few people said it, when you get stuck, you lower your standards and keep going. Yeah.
Just start quoting the DSM-4.
Right. And that's not a knock on Murakami. Just FYI, it's
No. Well, I think sometimes when you get to the point where you haven't, you want to put it on the page and you're starting to work through it, you still like, there's a little, is anyone going to want to read this? Maybe I need a few more of this and that and the other. Like it's actually refreshing to hear you say that, because I imagine you, do you draft on a typewriter? Is that true?
No, but
I heard that in an interview and I was like, what? Why is he the hippest person I know? I can't handle this.
No, but when I was drafting, doing the first draft, there was a friend who was hanging out with me at the time, and I said something about how I wish I was kind of being nostalgic about typewriters, because that was what I learned to type on when I was in school.
Yeah.
And how I miss the music of that click clack, when you're working. Right. And so she said, check your email. So I checked my email, and she had sent me a link to some freeware. So I downloaded it, and when I turned it on, the software basically turned my keyboard into a typewriter sound producing machine. So it even had the zzz ding right when you hit return. And that was such a great help in doing that, in getting through that first draft, because suddenly I had the music. I had the music of this machine, this which it wasn't the machine, but still the music was there. And it allowed me to forget that I was writing, and instead just let the words come out. So that was huge. I've been thinking, I don't know, because I have some friends who do write on typewriters, and they post pictures of them, and I'm like, oh, that looks really cool.
I've seen people at farmers markets too, doing kind of pop-up poetry on cards and stuff. I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Right. I wouldn't know how to load the ribbon, and I'd get ink everywhere. And well, I think it might be time to open up for questions.
Okay.
I've gotten a couple of signals that it's time, and I know there's a couple of really good ones in here. So I'm going to take a step back, Tomas,
Okay.
and let the question guide begin.
Sure, no, I'm happy to jump in. I loved this conversation. Okay, because I've not read the dream songs for a while, and I know all this talk about memory, Tomas, there's something about the word dream songs that seems so much like that's what memory is, kind of,
Yeah.
you know, and I have not gotten through all of those by John Berryman. So you're inspiring me to return to that. But we do have some great, this was a great Q&A. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Like, great questions, great responses. I'm madly writing notes over here, everyone. There are some great questions posted in the chat from some of our audience members, Tomas, and I'd love just to read some of those, and
Sure,
you can
please.
respond. So Elisa, who says she was one of your students at Texas State University, has a great question. She says, as a shapeshifter writer, do your feelings toward your poetry change, and are new discoveries made about memory that you feel should reflect in your poetry as well?
Hi, Alyssa. First of all, thanks for popping in. No, I feel like regardless of what genre I'm working in, Suzanne, you mentioned the word container. You know, they're just different containers. So really, in a way, so I just finished drafting the first draft of a novel. So it feels like playing around with different size canvases. You know, like the novel feels like a mural on the side of a giant wall. And when I'm trying some subject matter out, it's more a sense of, as opposed to me who's shifting shape, it's the size of the canvas that's shifting shape. But I've also tried to, the one thing that has changed is I've tried to, this is fairly new, I started asking myself the question, like, does all my work exist in the same universe? And then I thought, well, of course it does, because it's from the same imagination. And then I started wondering, well, can I be more obvious about that? So in this novel, there are some characters and some speakers from my first book of poems that appear in this novel. Like, I love when, like, Robert Rodriguez does this, and Quentin Tarantino, and other filmmakers, linking in very obvious ways, the universes of your writing into ta-da, like it's all one universe, right? Because it's one imagination, one life.
I love that idea of that's so like genre brave. Like, I'm going to take a character from a poem, I don't care if it's a different genre, and put it to a novel. I love that. Great question, Elisa, about shapeshifting. Really interesting. Jody also has a great question. She says, Tomas, women are often asked how do they balance motherhood and writing. Will you talk about how you balance fatherhood and writing, and the ways being a father informs your writing, and how you see or experience the world?
Yeah, great question. Balance in terms of the sort of nuts and bolts of like workload, and finding the time and space to write. So the way our lives are structured right now, I usually drive our son to daycare in the morning, drop him off around 9, and then I go to my office on campus, and I write until around 12:30, have lunch, work out, go pick him up, and drive home. Yeah, before that, before he was in daycare, when I was, we were at home with him, and, because of COVID, all of that as well, both of us working from home. Yeah, it was just time, just time with the little, just time with the kids. And that's like, I never felt like, I wish I could be writing right now, instead of changing a diaper or, getting them down for a nap or doing bath time or whatever. Because I felt like this is life, this is life, and my work, comes out of my life in direct and indirect ways. So I felt like I was just growing richer as a person, as a human. And I knew that eventually at some point, I would have the time and space for the work again. Even if someone had said, okay, my partner had said, you take tomorrow, like I'll have the kids, you take tomorrow for writing. I wouldn't have been able to. I was so tired, tired, sleep deprived. Yeah, like I wouldn't have had the energy for that. But right now we're in a good groove, and he'll say things that is making it, the comments that are making their way into my poems. He said something when he was really little. I haven't heard him say it in a while. Instead of saying like referring to, like, he knew the expression "turn the light on," but he said "turn the dark on." And I was like, oh, like that's poetry. Like I'm gonna put that's yeah. Where's my phone? Like put that in a note. Like that's going in a poem somewhere. And it's actually in a poem that a really short poem that just came out in the most recent issue of Sawani Review that's called "Turn the Dark On." Yeah. So yeah, it just feels like the life is feeding the art, and the art's in some ways like feeding the life.
I love that, turn the dark on. You know what I mean? That's great. I would be the same way. I was like, oh, gotta get that down. It's kind of like such an unmistakable idea. Thank you, Jody. That was a really interesting question to ask. There's more questions. Diane King has posted one. She says, can you talk a little bit about any squeamishness you had to get over to write about your family? Worry about the reactions, exposure, etc.
That's a great question. I shared with both my mother and my brother an early draft of the memoir, and then once we were in the proofing stage, I shared with them another draft to just, again, like make sure that they were okay with how they were represented in the book. After the first draft, or rather the first copy that I shared with my mom, were a couple of things that she asked me to change, which I changed. And I had no problems doing that. I always tell my students that, when you're writing about someone who's living, if you portray them in a way that they're not happy with and they're not satisfied with, then what is their go-to? It's not like they can then go write their own book to set the record straight. There's such a power imbalance. And with that comes a lot of responsibility, because that person's just left to just be helpless, twisting in the wind while everyone reads about them in whatever way they feel is unflattering. So yeah, so I changed those, changed a few things, but I try to change them in such a way that instead of going, like, let's say, from a literal description of a moment to a figurative description of a moment, so that I was still holding true, to the moment, to the emotion of the moment, the mood, the tone, without actually, spelling something out that would have made them uncomfortable.
No, it's interesting. I'm sure that wasn't the easiest of I don't know, dances to do, but it sounds like, I like that, the idea that, okay, let's make this a little more figurative, so I can still talk about what needs to be talked about, but it works for everyone. Yeah, no, it's great. So any more questions for the amazing Tomas? Drum roll, drum roll.
I feel like I should like pull a rabbit out of a hat after, being called the amazing Tomas. Saw someone in half.
I mean, well, I do feel like I love that you've just finished a novel. No, just the way you've talked about the writing process tonight. I loved your vignette at the beginning, Tomas, on names. That makes the poet in me very happy. And this whole thing about poets becoming memoirists, and how do we make that bridge from the lyric to the narrative? And And I loved your comments on the narrative arc, because I'm speaking totally for myself here, but we're like, oh my God, narrative arc. I think I'm terrified of narrative arcs, you know,
Yeah.
but your way of telling, you know, there's no right way to do a story. And so it was great to hear your ways of coming to your own storytelling format for this book. I found that
you.
really interesting. Yeah. Well, I think we are, you know, good to go. This was a great conversation. Suzanne Ohlmann, thank you so much.
Oh,
You
my
know,
absolute pleasure every night.
Check out our book, everyone. And Tomas, thank you so much. It was so great to just have you talking about your memoir. His poetry is great, everyone. I've posted like a mad woman in the chat. I hope you didn't mind, but there's great links to his work, Suzanne's. And I also did post a link to a survey. It's really helpful for us to hear about get audience feedback for our Big Texas Reads, because we want to bring you more. So I will let you all go. This was so much fun. Stay safe, everyone. No matter if you're cold, wherever you are in your region, keep warm. If you're in Texas, I don't know, try to navigate the shifting temperatures. And this was just a delight. So thank you so much, Tomas and Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll be back in 2023. More of the Big Texas Read.
Bye. Happy holidays.
Bye, Tomas. Bye, Suzanne.
Bye.